Hello, everyone. I'm Tony Bernardo, Dean of UCLA Anderson, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a new virtual series of conversations we're having with several distinguished speakers. Today, for our first guest in this virtual series, we're very excited to be joined by David Solomon, the Chairman and CEO of the Goldman Sachs Group. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm really happy to be here with everyone today.
Great. So I'll give a brief introduction of David, then a few housekeeping notes related to how we'll take questions from the participants before we get started. As I mentioned, David Solomon is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Goldman Sachs Group. Prior to assuming these roles in 2018, David served as Goldman's President and Chief Operating Officer, and before that, he was co-head of its investment banking division. He joined Goldman as a partner in 1999 after serving in leadership roles at the Irving Trust Company, Drexel, Burnham, and Stearns. He's a member of the Board of Trustees of Hamilton College, where he earned his bachelor's degree in political science, and he also serves on the board of the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City. I'll begin the conversation with some questions for David, but then we'll take questions from our participants. So let's get started. So David, thank you again for joining us. Given the extraordinary times we're in, many of the questions we'll focus on the crisis and the effects it's having on Goldman and your industry. But before we do that, I'd just like to ask a couple of, say, simpler, more personal questions. First, how are you doing? And secondly, how would you characterize your last couple of months?
Well, first, let me just say, as I said, I'm really happy to be here with all of you, and I hope everybody that's on the call, I hope everyone's healthy, I hope everyone's safe, and I hope everyone's families are also healthy and safe. I'm doing just fine. It's a little surreal. I'm sitting in our headquarters, which is at 200 West Street in Lower Manhattan. I live not too far from 200 West Street in Soho, a little less than a mile away. And so I've found it's been a good routine for me, and I've been doing this really since the middle of March when things escalated. Monday through Friday, I'm here from kind of 7:30 in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. We normally have 10,100 people in this building, but for the last 7 weeks, we've had about 60. So there is plenty of room for physical distancing. I basically have a whole floor to myself, but it has my office and my stuff. And so it gives me a grounding in a way to operate. And I'd say the first few weeks that this really escalated here in the United States in March, a lot of my focus was on making sure the firm was functioning well, making sure markets were operating smoothly, day-to-day interactions with government officials and regulatory officials. That's now all smoothed out, and it's a little bit more of what I'll call the new normal of operating our business. But there's nothing normal about the environment that we're in, and certainly I'm very proud of the firm's people and the way they're operating and all our business contingency planning. We never imagined a scenario where we'd have more than 98% of our people operating from home. We operate some very complicated businesses that you would have thought historically had to have people present, in a physical location. Yet we've managed to scale up, and it's working quite well. And so, one day at a time, watching what's going on and trying to figure out what the implications are with respect to what's going on as everyone else is. But I know while this is very hard for everyone, we will get through this, and hopefully we'll be stronger as we come through it. But it's going to take some time, and there are going to be an awful lot of people who need support, who really are going to need help working their way through this.
So was there a particular moment or time when you realized this was going to be an experience or a crisis unlike anything you've seen, perhaps, as a corporate leader?
Well, it's very interesting, and one of the things I've tried to go back and think about. We operate around the world. We have over 90 offices in 45 countries, and we have about 1,500 people in Hong Kong and 400 or 500 people in China. And so, in late January, this became an issue for us, and we basically went to a work from home mode for our people in Hong Kong and China, and really saw this unfold there. And what I've gone back and I've debated, I've kicked, I've prodded myself as to why didn't I really believe that this had the potential to really become a global pandemic? And of course, everything's through the lens of history. And I remember very clearly how we operated through SARS back in 2003. And I also know that as late as early March, leaders here, including I saw Dr. Fauci speak in early March to a group of CEOs that I was participating in, where there was really a view that this was not going to be a significant issue in the United States. And there are lots of reasons why we got that wrong. I remember being down in Miami, Florida for the Super Bowl weekend, the first weekend in February, and talking to a handful of CEOs and investors where we were saying we were worried about this, but yet we still didn't think it was going to become a global pandemic the way it has. It was in late February or early March. There wasn't a moment, but it just kept building, and it got to the point in late February or early March where I was getting much more concerned about the way this would spread out. And interestingly, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a health expert, but my concern certainly was for health, life. This is a health crisis, and first and foremost, it's a human crisis, but you could see the way the health crisis was going to create an economic crisis, and that economic crisis would also have very profound implications. And I would say in early March, we became increasingly concerned, and by, the week of March 9th, it was pretty clear it was a 5-alarm fire.
Right. And, managing through this crisis, did you have to change priorities? Were there some things that became, especially for your organization, issues that perhaps weren't top of mind, but then immediately became top of mind? For example, one thing I was very concerned about here at Anderson, it's very important to keep these strong ties among our students, staff, and faculty. And it was very important to think about ways that we could maintain community in this environment. I was wondering if there was any priority that sort of immediately became apparent.
Well, there are two ways, Tony, I think, to think about that. The first is whenever you go into a crisis, a real crisis, the first mode that anyone that's operating a big enterprise has to think about is there anything about this crisis that can affect the viability of our enterprise? And, as a financial firm, and a financial firm that's on very, very solid footing, and by the way, the last time we went through a crisis, financial firms were at the epicenter, right, and they weren't on a solid footing. The first response was, what do we have to do to make sure that under any circumstances, our enterprise remains on solid footing? And by the way, I think that's an exercise that all businesses went through. And there are some businesses that have been very profoundly affected by this, where fundamental operating viability has been challenged. For us, the thing that gets financial institutions in trouble was just liquidity. And so, our immediate focus was on making sure that our liquidity position and our ability to operate allowed us to be viable. I was never concerned about this in the context of this crisis, but there was a bunch of work that had to be done to reinforce that. As soon as you understand that, you start thinking about a framework that you think in the crisis is important to operate under. And I would say for me and for this organization, I tried to gravitate to something very, very simple that could be easily articulated to all our people, and then you can build off of that. And so I broke it down to, what do we really care about at a moment like this? Our people, their health, their safety, their well-being, their families, our clients, because that's our business. How do we serve our clients, whether they're governments or corporations or institutions or individuals that we serve? And lastly, our communities that we operate in. How do we help and support our communities where there's so much need at a time like this? And I think creating that framework allows you to then get the leadership of the organization in a mode of really delivering against those things. And so, of course, the first priority was our people, their health, their safety, making sure we were providing the resources to take care of our people, because that's our number one responsibility. When you feel like you have that under control, you can really start focusing on your clients and also on communities and finding ways that we can use our broad platform to effectively be supportive.
So, there's a crisis management aspect of this, but at the same time, that there may be important changes that are going to happen over the intermediate and long run. How do you think about both the crisis management part of it and also knowing that you have to start adapting business plans perhaps for a changing environment? So
the adaptation is is different for different businesses. If you're running an airline or a hotel company, the adaptation mode at the present moment is enormous, because basically your business has gone to zero revenues. It's
Right.
closed. You're trying to sustain it, with very little activity, and that's fundamentally different than if you're operating a business like ours, which certainly there are different dynamics to the business, but the business is functionally open and operating differently and operating remotely. And there was a lot that went on with that. We run enormous trading businesses that provide market liquidity for market participants. And the concept, if you had asked me even 3 months ago, could that have been done 100% remotely all around the globe, I would have told you not without massive issues. Yet we've managed to adapt and find a way to do that. When you talk about medium and longer term, I have a slightly different philosophy than some of what I'm hearing, as I'm talking to people. The first thing I just say is the one thing that I am certain of is that I am very unsure of how this is all going to play out. That is really the only thing that I am certain of. I turn on the TV, I get up every morning. I'm lucky enough to have a gym in my apartment, so I get up every morning at 6 o'clock and I get on the elliptical or on the treadmill and I turn on the TV, and I often want to throw my towel at the TV because people on the TV are so sure. And this is as uncertain an environment. In my 35-year professional career, this is as uncertain an environment that I've ever seen. And so when people pontificate about the medium or longer term and the changes that we're going to see, I think you've got to be careful. And so what I'd say is that a crisis accelerates changes that were in motion. It accelerates trends, but it generally doesn't create new trends. And if you use history as a guide, history would tell you that in other crises where there's real disruption, there is real certainty at the time of the crisis that things are going to really be different. But when people feel safe and secure and they get on the other side of the crisis, behaviors tend to gravitate back to the existing behaviors. So I'm not a lot of people talking about office space changes. And I would highlight, it was 5 minutes ago that everybody was talking about there would only be density in office space. Right. And everybody would be gravitating to WeWorks-like models. Now everybody's saying there's going to be much, much less office space. Everybody's going to work more remotely. Well, there's no question. Technology has allowed more flexibility around remote work. And in some ways, this might accelerate it, and there might be businesses where this changes more. But if people feel safe and secure, they want to interact with other people, I'd be more cautious in dictating significant change to the way a lot of these things operate. Now, we've got to get to the other side of this healthcare crisis, and that's real, and I can't plot the course of that, and there's a lot of variables that will affect it, but I think it's fair to say that the chance that we don't have control of this virus 2 years from now is low. It could happen faster, and by the way, there is a possibility in the distribution of outcomes that we can't, that something goes more wrong. But the chances are it's something that we can control, we will control. And when we get to a place that people feel safe, behaviors will go back. I'm sitting in our building here at 200 West in New York, which is right across the street from the World Trade Center site. And we basically signed the lease on the land to build this building in early 2002, right after 9/11. And I remember at the time people saying we were crazy. Why were we going to invest in Lower Manhattan? Lower Manhattan was dead. It would never come back. Well, for anybody who's lived in New York or spent time in New York, Lower Manhattan over the last 18 years has had an incredible boom. It's actually the hottest neighborhoods in New York from a real estate perspective have been in Lower Manhattan. And so I just think you have to be very careful about how you project forward, how dramatic change will be. We do have to get through the healthcare crisis, but I'm very unsure. And so I've got plenty of time after we get through this to worry about, what I'll call bigger picture changes.
Great. We'll elaborate on some of those ideas a little bit later, but first I want to just note that in response to the pandemic, Goldman has committed $550 million in relief funding for small businesses who are, clearly being devastated in this current crisis. And I know that you're working with the community development financial institutions to make sure that these small businesses actually get the funds. So please tell us about this effort. I think this is one of the most important efforts that we can make in this time.
Sure, and this speaks to, this speaks, when I was talking about our three pillars, this speaks to communities and really being focused on our communities. Small businesses are the lifeblood of economies, and they generate an enormous amount of the job growth that exists, and also innovation, and also support families, broadly across the country. At a time like this, they feel the pain of this, much more profoundly, and many of them are very, very small businesses that operate in underserved communities, in places where they don't have the right financial resources. We as a firm got very involved about 10 years ago with small businesses across America through a program we created over 10 years ago called 10,000 Small Businesses, which is a program where small businesses can sign up to a 6-month education program. To a degree, it's like a business school process for people who are running small businesses that allows them to think about how they can grow their businesses, expand their business, therefore hire more people in their communities and broaden their platform. It has been hugely successful. Along with Goldman Sachs, there's been enormous sponsorship from Warren Buffett and also from Mike Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies over the last 10 years. And we've educated 10,000 businesses in that program, and we now have this army of businesses that are scattered around the country. We've run this program in all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, plus Puerto Rico. And so that's given us an insight into some of these struggles. And so as this was unfolding, we wanted to find a way that we could use our resources to really support those businesses. And, we looked when PPP came out and it was rolling forward, one of the things that we knew, because the banks were becoming a distribution channel for this, was that would be a complex process. And we're not a bank that serves businesses. While we do some business with individuals, we really don't serve businesses. So we didn't have a natural connection to small businesses other than our 10,000 small business platform. And so we've worked through that work, we've worked with community development financial institutions, which basically act as a financial services function for businesses that really are too small to really be served by big, broad banks, or are in communities that don't get the same service that other communities get from the large-scale banks. And we really have seen over the last 5 years that that's a great channel to deploy capital into small businesses. And so we committed to initially deploy $500 million through CDFIs into small businesses. We then gave $25 million to CDFIs to provide better technology, also some coaching or better tools to allow them to better deploy this capital. And we're getting to the point that almost all $500 million of that in loan form to these small businesses have been deployed. And my guess is if we have demand in certain markets, it will ramp up. And I've worked in close coordination with mayors and governors and senators in a variety of states to make specific allocations to states to meet those needs. And those programs have been very well received. And I think they're having an impact. And if there is more demand, we're going to continue to try to scale it.
Following up on that, how do you view the overall sort of fiscal and monetary response that we're applying in this time? What's your overall view? Clearly, targeting small businesses is extraordinarily important. What about sort of broadly these policies?
Well, at a time like this, when you have this kind of crisis, I really do believe that it is the role of government to step in and provide support. That is one of the fundamental roles governments are supposed to provide. And there's going to be a lot of debate about the actions taken, both from a monetary policy perspective and a fiscal policy perspective. But broadly speaking, I would say to this point, I would applaud both legislators and policymakers and the Fed for the swiftness with respect to the actions they took. I think from a monetary policy perspective, those actions have allowed for restoration of confidence in markets, which is incredibly important. And markets are open and providing capital, to businesses, so businesses can raise capital and bridge through this crisis. And I think that's incredibly important. That obviously supports jobs and economic well-being, throughout a significant portion of the economy. I think that the government, through the fiscal stimulus, is trying to get money into people's hands, and I think that's important. Whenever this happens in any crisis, there will be second guessing, there will be poking, there will be issues. When you try to do things quickly, it is to a degree a blunt instrument, and you can immediately find things that are wrong with it, and then you have to try to adjust. But generally speaking, I think they're the right actions at this point in time. Now, with those actions come responsibilities going forward. And that's where, the debate will get interesting and more complicated. I think it's the right thing to do this, but we will be saddling ourselves with more debt. We will be printing money to a degree that there'll be consequences to that. And we will have to make, prudent decisions and thoughtful decisions from a policy perspective when we get to the other side to navigate out of that. I think at the moment, though, the right focus is on doing what we need to do to sustain the fundamental support, for our society and to try to keep the economy working the best that we can.
So in your best case scenario, when do you think the economy really starts to turn around, and what do you see as the biggest threat to a potential recovery?
So I can't give you a best case scenario. I can give you a framework to think about what's happening, and then we can all have a debate and question, what will shift that, around that framework. And so here's the framework I provide. And I don't know that this framework is right, but I think that there's something about the framework that I know is correct. The order of magnitude is harder to quantify. So we, for a variety of reasons, shut down a significant amount of demand in our economy, which has decreased GDP, the output of the economy, very meaningfully at the end of the first quarter and now in the second quarter. The base case that I would suggest is sometime by the end of the second quarter or the beginning of the third quarter, we will start to see growth off the bottom of the demand contraction we've created. If you look at Goldman Sachs' base economic forecast, after an 11% year-over-year decline in the second quarter, which really annualizes to a 34, 35% economic decline, we'll see a 19% growth in the third quarter and some growth that's less than that in the fourth quarter. But if you take the base case that our economists are putting forward, we will only get back in the third and the fourth quarter 50% of the output that we lost in the first and the second quarter. And so that's still a long way back from where we were, a long way back to where we were on January 1st, 2020 from an economic perspective. And so whether that's exactly right or it's not, the framework's right. We're going to start to rebuild in the second half of the year, but we're still at the end of the year going to be a long way from where we were when we started. What does that mean? Unemployment will not be as high as it is right now, but it will still be high, higher than we want it to be by a lot. And so I think we have to, in the best case scenario, be prepared for the fact that the economic recovery, no matter how quickly we eradicate the virus and provide people with a sense of safety and security, my own belief is the economic recovery is going to be a multi-year process. And that's something that there'll be a lot of pain that comes with that. Now, the faster we get to a place where people feel safe and secure from a health perspective, the more you might be able to mute or tamp down, how long we feel, this economic pressure. But it's very uncertain how we will think about how this will evolve around health and safety and security, with respect to the virus. That's very hard to predict.
I was going to sort of wait for questions at the end on Slido, but given what you just said, the top question on Slido is a nice sort of segue. And the question is, and I think you've partially answered, what are your thoughts on the apparent disconnect between the stock market in the last month or so and these unprecedented unemployment claims? And clearly our views about how quickly we recover, since the stock market is a forward-looking institution. How do you think about that? Because I know that's
Sure.
something that puzzles a lot of people in the midst of these tremendous unemployment claims we haven't seen really in our history. We have had a pretty significant run-up in the market in the last month.
Sure. So there are, first of all, I don't have a good answer. And so, I'm not a market prognosticator, but I can give you a couple of theories for why you've had such a recovery in market prices. The first is markets at the end of the day do function in response to the liquidity that's available to be invested in markets. And we have had an unprecedented amount of monetary and fiscal stimulus here in the United States, all over the world. And the amount of liquidity that's available to support markets is very, very high. And so there are some that would speculate that the move in equity markets to some degree is a function of this significant monetary and fiscal policy. Now, in the long run, markets trade on a multiple of the earnings. Stock market trades on a multiple of the earnings that are generated by the companies that are a part of it. And I would tell you that this is just my own view. And if you listen to the framework I just laid out, I think at the moment, the consensus estimate for the overall earnings power, let's say, of the S&P, if you ask me in the distribution of outcomes, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, will that be better than what the expectation is today, the same as the expectation is today, or worse than the expectation is today? I think in the distribution of outcomes, there's a higher expectation that it will disappoint a little bit more. Now, that's a personal point of view. I don't know if that's right, but that could lead to a retrace and rebalance, some of what's happened here. On the other hand, you also have to understand that it's a broad market, and one of the expressions I don't like is this expression of we've turned the economy off. We now have to reopen the economy. The economy's open. The economy's functioning. There are a lot of businesses that are doing better because of this environment. I'll just pick one. We're on a Zoom call. Okay, Zoom's doing a lot better because of this crisis. There are a lot of, think about broadband businesses, certain software businesses. You think about businesses. You think about businesses where people are getting staples, and they're getting staples, through online delivery, et cetera. I mean, they're businesses that are doing better. The economy is open. What we did is, if we had an economy that indexed at 100, we've knocked, some, 10, 20%, out of that economy. And now we have to build it back up. And so, the question is, what's the right way, to value that forward trajectory of earnings? And then what are the other factors like liquidity in markets and monetary policy and fiscal policy that can create forward stimulus? And so all those things have an impact. I've personally been surprised by the way the stock market's reacted over the last couple of weeks, based on the fact that I still think there's enormous uncertainty around the path of really getting people comfortable that they're safe and secure around the virus. But I'm also smart enough to know that the market's a lot smarter than I am, and the market may see things that I don't see.
So before we go to the audience, I have a few sort of leadership type questions.
Sure.
I think we're really sort of getting acute understanding of just how important leadership is, especially in these crisis situations. And this question actually comes from one of our graduating MBA students. And he asks, given the current environment, it's easy to become frustrated given how things aren't going the way we wanted. Can you speak to some setbacks you've had in your career and the strategies you employed to turn what could have been impediments into opportunities? In other words, can you speak to the value of resiliency?
So I think that's a great question, and I think resiliency is an incredibly tremendous attribute that serves everyone well, not just professionally in your pursuit of your professional career, but I think it serves you well in life. I'm working on a project at the moment that I was invited to participate in, that iHeart Radio is sponsoring, where a group of CEOs, leaders, are going to give virtual commencement speeches, not a specific speech for a particular commencement, but just a series of, if I was to speak to a group of graduates today, what would you say? And I've been working on that, and one of the things that I'm talking about in there is that there generally is a perception when you're looking at people who've evolved in their careers and people wind up in leadership roles, that their career generally was a straight line, and that all of them are crooked paths with lots of places where you fell down, you've been dusted up, and you've got get up, dust yourself off, and plow ahead. And, part of it's the journey, and part of it's understanding that whenever things aren't going your way, there's probably something you can learn, something that can help you grow and develop, and that ultimately resiliency will serve you, very, very well. You mentioned in my bio that at one point in my career, I worked at a firm called Drexel, Burnham, Lambert. I worked there from 1986 to 1990. I was 24 to 28 years old, but it was really the place that I worked where I said, this business really intrigues me. I'm intrigued by the business. I learned a lot. I was very, very excited about it. I chose to work there. When I got the job there, I was applying to go to graduate school, to go to business school. And at that time, business school was much more of a prerequisite to work in the financial industry. And I chose to put off going to business school to work there. And then 4 years later, poof, it went out of business. I didn't have an MBA. I didn't have a job. I had just gotten married, was going to start a family. And, that was a very dislocating thing. And I remember on a very personal basis, really being devastated by it. And when I went to work at my next job, I just hated it compared to the experience I had been having. And, everybody has those experiences. And I've had a number, both personally and professionally in my life, but you have to recognize that everyone goes through that. There are no straight lines. And if you really want to build a career, no matter where that path's going to take you, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And there's certainly going to be lots of bumps along the way. And what can you learn? How can you really persevere? Becomes a really good skill.
So how would you describe yourself as a leader? And in particular, what sort of leadership quality do you think you have that really helped in this environment?
Well, I like any other leader, I'm learning as I'm going along. I don't know what's prepared me for this. Probably I'm not prepared to be running a company in a global pandemic, but I am. And so I'm going to do the best that I can. And I think one of the things you have to do for starters is you've got to be listening and watching others and take cues from others that might have had more experience or, might have something that you can offer. I do think, and you touched on this, Tony, that communication is extremely key at a time like this. And I think one of the things I'm really proud of is the way our leadership team is really communicating throughout our organization. And, I'd say one of the things that I'm proud of is, we're trying new things, different things to try to see what works, because there's really no roadmap for this. So one of the people who works on my team about 6 or 7 weeks ago said to me, I have an idea. I want you on Sunday night when you're sitting at home, after the weekend, I want you to take out your iPhone, go into voice notes, and just record a message, 5 or 10 minutes. Talk to the firm. Tell them about your weekend. Tell them about what you're worried about. Let them hear your voice and just talk. And so I tried it. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And she said, let's do that. We're going to send it out to the firm. So I did that. That's led to me. I've done that now about 8 or 9 times over the last 7 weeks. And the first time I did it, I wasn't really sure what the reaction was going to be. My email box lit up with emails from people all over the firm that I didn't know, just saying, thank you. It was great to hear your voice. It was great to hear about what you're doing and how you feel. It made me feel better. And so I think one of the things that's really important at a time of crisis is to be visible and to be heard and to be listening. And I think that at a time like this, there's a very delicate balance between being extremely empathetic and in tune with the fact that all the people that you're leading are struggling, and at the same point, understanding that you've got to run a business and strike the right balance and keep people moving in a direction. And that's not easy. And then also at a time like this, because this is a human crisis, it's a real human crisis, really being able to have some bandwidth to see what you can do to support others. And I think one of the things that the firm's been very focused on is how can we support others? How can we be involved in communities? Because our people want to be a part of that. And I think that matters to our people. And it's the right thing to do. And so, I don't know that we're getting it exactly right. In fact, I assure you, there are a lot of things we're not getting right. But you know what? We're trying different things. When we get it right, we lean in to doing that more. When we get it wrong, we adjust. And look, we had our business contingency planning. We thought the week of March 9th, we were going to blue team, white team, and having teams in and out of the office. And that lasted for 2 days. And then there were people that were saying to me, no, we have to stick to it. We have to do that. And I said to people, our people don't want to be here. We can't make them be here. We have to adapt. And so you make decisions, you adapt. When you make a mistake, you adapt again, and you do the best that you can. And look, we're learning, I'm learning. There's no textbook for running a big organization in a pandemic. And I'm sure you're feeling that, running Anderson. I mean, there's, and I sit on the board of Hamilton College, and, later today I'm on a group there that's helping figure out, how we continue, to operate Hamilton College, in this environment. It's whatever it is you're responsible for. These are not easy tasks. Yeah.
I joke to my wife pretty much hourly. I must have missed that day in grad school when they taught that.
Well, I'm thinking I've missed a lot, but you know what? We're learning. We're all learning. We're all doing our best, and that's the best we can do.
So for our MBA students, this is kind of a little bit forward-looking. Our MBA students are interested in investment banking or careers in financial services. What advice would you give them at this time?
Well, and I'm very, very biased, so I'll be very clear about this. I think financial services, I think investment banking as a place to start a career or to build on a career at an early age. It's one of those industries that gives you a handful of things that I think are really broadening. And not everyone that comes and works in financial services or investment banking is going to spend their career at it the way I have. But there are a couple of things that I think are really, really critical in an early stage of the career. One, are you putting yourself in a place where there's an enormous opportunity to learn and gain experience and have real variability, in that experience? Because repetitions, matter. Repetitions of experience matter. And this is still a business or an opportunity set where you learn a lot, very, very quickly. Number two, are you surrounded by really smart, interesting, motivated people that you can learn from, both your peers and people that are, ahead of you in your careers? And that's true in spades in financial services. There are other industries like that too, but it's true in spades in financial services. And three, are you developing a professional network that will help expand the opportunity set for you as you move forward? And the answer to that is absolutely. Whether it's clients, companies, governments that you work for, whether it's individuals you work with, you broaden, that opportunity set or that network of relationships, and that then creates opportunities. So I think it's a great way to broaden or continue kind of the educational life. It's not for everyone. There are lots of good paths and lots of different courses. But I just observe. I never had a plan, that I wanted to be an investment banker. I never had a plan that I was going to work in financial services for 35 years. One of the things I find today that's a little bit different than 35 years ago when I graduated. Everyone wants to know exactly what the course is and exactly how it links together and exactly where it's going to carry them. And, I'm a big believer of find something that interests you that you want to give a shot and throw yourself in it. And then really try to take a few years and kind of let it be and see what you get out of it. Don't be in a rush. Don't be in a hurry. That was a piece of advice I got from my grandmother a long time ago. Don't be in a hurry. I think it's good advice in a simple form. And I give you a little anecdote of a story of a young woman who works for me here, who came in to see me a couple of years ago, and she said to me, I really wanted to talk to you and get some advice on what I should do next. And I said, okay, well, before I give you advice on that, why don't you tell me about how it's going now? How do you like your job? Oh, I love it. Fantastic. The work is so interesting. I mean, it's so interesting. I'm learning a ton every day. Great. How do you like your boss? Oh, she's amazing. And she really spends time with me, and she's mentoring me, and she's teaching me so much. And I couldn't have a better boss. How do you like the people you're working with? Ah, unbelievable. We've all become friends, and we're out on the weekends, and we're having a great time. And this is, it's wonderful. I said, go back to work. Okay, if you have all those things going for you, Okay, you don't need to worry about what's next. Focus on this and enjoy it, because in most of your career, you know, 1, 2, or 3 of those things are not going to be clicking. And, you know, that'll happen to everybody. So go enjoy this moment and, you know, pick a different time to worry about what's next. And so it's a journey. Be in the moment, you know, try to enjoy it and see where it takes you.
Great. One more question before we go to the audience. So I understand you have a fairly unusual hobby for a CEO, and you occasionally are a disc jockey, a DJ at nightclubs and music festivals. Tell us how you got into that and your favorite music and how you balance life as a CEO and a DJ.
Yeah, so it is. I guess I'm told repeatedly it's an unusual hobby. Although if you become if you become a CEO and you're a DJ, you'd actually find out there are a bunch of other CEOs that are DJs out there, probably not with as much visibility as I have. You know, I've always been into music, and you know, 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I started playing around with it. I really started playing around with it because I have been very involved as a banker in the building of a lot of the big buildings in Las Vegas and the expansion of Las Vegas, you know, over a 20-year period of time. And I was out in Las Vegas 10 years ago, and I really, you know, I had been a dad. I had been working hard. I wasn't hanging out in clubs and listening to house music or electronic dance music. But as that was exploding, you know, 10 years or so ago, I was out in Las Vegas, and I was talking to one of the people that ran one of the big casino hotels, and he was telling me about the way the business was changing out there. Gambling was becoming less important. It was still important, but they were making an enormous amount of money in the nightclubs. And so I wanted to see kind of the economic ecosystem of that. And I went down one night with somebody to walk me around and listen to it. And I loved the music. I just loved the music. And so I started listening to it a little bit. And then, you know, a number of years ago, I went and I asked a good friend here in New York, a guy named Scott Greenstein, who is the president of SiriusXM. I said, I want to learn this. I want to learn about this. How can I learn about this? And he said, well, you should go talk to Paul Oakenfold. Now, Paul Oakenfold, a number of people on this call will know, is a legendary, you know, old school DJ who's roughly my age. And he and I met out in Los Angeles, and we kind of hit it off. And he started talking to me about teaching me to do this a little bit. He introduced me to somebody in New York that helped me, and I started doing it as a hobby. And it was fun. And nobody really knew about it, but it was fun. And, you know, I wasn't really very good, but it was fun. And then it got a little bit more visible, and I kind of decided I either had to throw myself into it or I had to stop. And I kind of decided to throw myself into it. I got a little bit of support from Lloyd Blankfein, who was running the firm before, who made a public joke about it in a nice way that was supportive. And so I just said, you know what, I'll see where this goes. And it's turned out I really enjoy it. I love house music. I love all sorts of music, but I've really come to appreciate house music, and I really enjoy it. I'm producing a little bit of music, and I've also created a platform around it, given I'm not confused that I get to do it because of my professional life more than I might normally. So as I'm doing it, I'm trying to raise money for charities. I've created a record label that's providing support to addiction charities. Now I'm trying to provide some COVID support, and so I'm going to continue to do it and see where it goes.
Wonderful. So a few questions from the audience. You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but wanted to perhaps give you a chance to elaborate. How do you envision working from home affecting the U.S. long term? Will certain cities like New York, San Francisco, and L.A. retain their price premium? And I think you alluded also to issues around office space and so on. Wonder if you could elaborate on that. I know that's a question that many people are interested in.
Yeah, and we touched on this. We touched on this a little bit, Tony. But it's, and again, I think it's very hard to roll forward dramatic change that wasn't part of a trend. So it's very easy to see that there's been a trend toward online shopping, and there's no question online retail, and there's no question that this is going to accelerate that trend. But we were kind of on that course. Mm-hmm. And this might jump it ahead a little faster than if the pandemic hadn't happened. But there's nobody that would say that we were on a trend of discounting and diminishing major urban centers and urban lifestyle. And so while at the moment it feels like that's a very uncomfortable thing, because in high density areas, it looks like it's clear that the virus and the pandemic is worse or has the potential to be worse, I think it's way too soon, to throw a flag on the viability of urban life. And in fact, I would argue, if you look at trends from the past, that history would tell you that when we get to a place that people feel safe, you probably won't, send that trend in a different direction. And so, the easiest thing to point to, I'll use it again because it's a great example, is after 9/11. After 9/11, people were moving out of New York City. People were very, very concerned about the threat of terrorism and about living, in urban areas, especially New York City. And there were all sorts of the same, questions about significant societal structural change. And for a short period of time, you saw short-term behaviors that amplified that. But we made an enormous investment in this country in making everyone feel more secure against the threat of terrorism. We really made progress, just as I know we will, with respect to healthcare and pandemic security as we invest over time. I'm very optimistic about that. And when people felt more secure, we didn't create a new trend. And so I'm not sure about this, but if you look at history as a lens, I would be surprised if the result of this, when we ultimately resolve it, is a massive shift against the importance of urban existence, across America. That doesn't mean that there's not still suburban existence and there aren't people living in more rural or country, kind of lifestyles. All will exist. But I'd be very surprised if we woke up 5 or 10 years from now. There'd have to be a lot more than this pandemic to really create a major directional shift from the direction we were operating in.
So in financial services, what are the trends that you think will be sped up by this crisis? So
well, there's digitization of financial services. I mean, I think there's still financial services, because of the intense regulatory, overlay, has been slower to digitize, go online. I mean, it exists in a variety of ways, but it's been slower. This will probably accelerate it. And, we've seen it in our business. We have a very small consumer business, Marcus at Goldman Sachs, that we're obviously growing. We took in a record number of digital deposits, retail deposits last quarter. Proportionally, our deposits grew at a faster pace given our footprint than big competitors with big, branch infrastructure. And it would kind of make sense. Okay, if people were trying to do things and they couldn't go to a bank branch and they weren't necessarily, set up online, although a lot of people go with, with the main consumer banking, entities in this country, are set up online. But this will accelerate the same way it's accelerating other online behaviors. It'll probably accelerate some of the move to online financial services. Financial services is a massive business, and it's really the largest business that hasn't been more thoroughly disrupted onto integrated digital platforms. And I'm a big believer over the next 10 years, we're going to see big changes in that context. The regulatory world makes it tougher, because if not for the regulatory world, you'd already see, companies like Amazon or Google or Facebook much more involved in financial services. They all want to provide, access for their customers, but they don't really want to step into the regulatory moat and take the burden, that goes with that. But I do think the big banks will continue to innovate. Players like us who have resources but don't have legacy are innovating with brand new digital platforms. And then there'll also be some startup businesses that, that innovate and play a role as they innovate. And so I think the digitization of financial services will accelerate because of this.
What do you think about M&A markets? This could be an environment. I could see arguments going both ways on the M&A market in, say, the next 12 to 18 months. Do you have thoughts on that, and particular industries where we might see a lot of that activity?
Sure. There's no question that when you have an event like this, when you come out of it, it will force consolidation activity, in a variety of different ways. I think one of the most important things when you evaluate short-term M&A trends or M&A activity is just confidence, CEO confidence. It's very hard at the moment to be a CEO and have a lot of confidence as to exactly what the forward looks like. When you're putting businesses together, you have to underwrite a base case. It's very hard to underwrite a base case. I mean, a simple analogy is you can watch every day as one company after another withdraws their guidance for future earnings. That's because they think it's too uncertain to forward a base case. In the short term, that certainly will have a very, that will diminish M&A activity in the short term. However, when we get to the other side, there'll be some reorientation in some of these businesses, and I think you'll see some consolidation activity, that comes out of this. I think when you look at airlines, for example, I think domestically there could be more consolidation. I think there's going to be a big debate about airlines as a utility or airlines as an investable business.
Right.
They really are a utility that we need to keep the economy going. That's something that since the deregulation of airlines has been a constant ebb and flow debate. So I think there will be plenty of change coming out of this as businesses try to position and take advantage of opportunities. But you really have to have more confidence to be able to really think about those things with a lot of certainty.
You mentioned airlines, obviously facing pretty severe challenges. Another industry or sort of set of businesses that are facing real difficulties are all the businesses that rely on sort of live audiences, sports, movies, concerts, theater in New York. You discussed earlier that we may get back to some sense of normalcy here, but how do you view the prospects in some of those very, very important industries?
Well, I think that it's very possible that we go through a period of time, a year and a half, where it's very, very hard for those activities to be participated in with the normalcy that we would look back and we were doing in January, let's say. But at the same point, that doesn't mean that they're not viable businesses and activities where there can be participation. For sure, you're going to see sports leagues playing again, given television contracts, video distribution, et cetera. Sports can play with enhanced testing. Leagues can operate safely. The Miami Dolphins made an announcement yesterday. I didn't get a chance to really look at it, where they were talking about designing Hard Rock Stadium down in Miami to hold 15,000 people instead of the 60,000 or 65,000 it normally seats. And so the question is, can you have a business model, if you use sports as an example, where there's an economic model that can work for a period of time? It's not as attractive as the model was when everything's up and running in normalcy, as we say. But I think if the virus and the trajectory of the healthcare crisis that we're dealing with does not allow us to go back to the normalcy, these businesses will adapt and adjust. Since you raised it, being in a nightclub, I think, is something that's really hard to adapt or adjust until we get to a place that people really are safe and we really have the virus under control. But being able to watch sports on TV, having leagues function, have limited live viewing, with physical distancing, all those things are things that I know from discussions I'm having with team owners in different leagues, with the CEOs of different leagues, all being thought about. And I think you're going to see that if the healthcare crisis prevents an acceleration. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that it'll take a year and a half for this to recover or that it will take less. I can see scenarios where, because we have better information, we have better testing, maybe some of the therapies improve some of the risk, particularly in people that are more vulnerable, that this could accelerate more quickly. And I could see scenarios where we can't really get the confidence we need for some of that stuff until we get further along or we get to a vaccine. But my point at the beginning was we will get to the other side. What's uncertain is the journey, until we get there.
Great. Well, I'll just have one more question before we end today. I always, in this time, I think about how lucky I am. I have a wonderful family. I've been able to navigate this crisis, I think, as well as anyone could expect. And I really, have a lot of concern, like all of us, about the most vulnerable in our community. And I'd just like to sort of give you a chance to give us some thoughts on, how you are helping those in the community who are really at great risk, and perhaps an appeal to the importance of doing this, particularly in this time.
Sure. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm incredibly concerned, with so many who are struggling at this point in time, with so many who are really in a position where they don't have the basic necessities to keep them safe and to keep them healthy. And there are a number of ways that I'm personally involved. As you said, I've been involved in the Robin Hood Foundation for a long time. Robin Hood Foundation supports hundreds of organizations here in New York that provide, basic care, shelter, feeding. And we're right at the moment in the middle of a big fundraising effort. Normally, Robinhood has its big benefit every year in May. And because we can't have the benefit as a benefit, next Monday night, Robinhood's going to do a big virtual telethon, for lack of a better term, where our hope is to raise $100 million in COVID relief that we can get actively out, in communities very, very quickly. Through Goldman Sachs efforts, we're doing a number of things. And for example, next Tuesday, I'm going to be heading out to some hospitals in the Northwell system. One of the things that we saw was an immediate need for frontline healthcare workers. And these people are heroes. These people are people that are separating themselves from their families and are working to save lives every day. And they were having trouble with basic needs in hospitals, hydration for themselves, food, and getting access to food. So if they had a 5-minute break, they could get something to eat. So we went out and we did two things. We set up hydration centers that we sponsored or brought in the resources so people could pick up water bottles and have with them and hydrate. But we also went to restaurants that were local and near that were closed. And we said, hey, open up to cook food for hospitals. We'll buy the food, we'll package it, we'll deliver it, and put it in a way that it can be grab and go for hospitals. And we've done that with a couple of hospitals out in the Northwell system. And we committed that in April and May. We're expanding it now to 2 more hospitals, and I'm going to go out and package some food next week and try to participate and talk to some of the frontline healthcare workers. And look, we all have to find ways, as small as they are, if you can touch one person and make a difference, let's do it. Because if everybody goes out and helps just one person, we'll have a huge impact on improving what's obviously a very, very difficult situation.
Well, I can't thank you enough, David, for this wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your joining our community. This was really a terrific beginning to our speaker series. I hope we'll have a chance to see each other soon in Los Angeles. And thank you all for joining us today.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and I hope everyone stays safe and healthy.